Hello everyone. Because it's the holidays and my schedule for taking turns in the All Warhammer Nations Skavenblight game is a bit slowed down, I thought I would take the time to just have a look at one of the Warhammer nations and just kind of provide a bit of a nation overview. I'm not calling it a guide because I'm not really offering advice in pretender you should select or what particular strategies and research goals you should have if you want to play as the nation. I'm just kind of taking a look at it, going through the recruitables and any other elements the nation has, and then we can just talk about things that seem interesting, different things we could do with the recruits, and I hope to just kind of give you a taste of the nation and maybe kind of pique your interest in trying it. So the nation I'm going to be looking at today is Bretonnia. Bretonnia are a nation of feudal knights from the Warhammer world. They're quite against magic. It's only allowed to be practiced within this particular religion. They have these maidens and damsels that are the envoys of a mythical figure, the Lady of the Lake. And their military is really made up of two things, which is peasants and knights. And the knights are excellent at fighting, and the peasants are numerous. So the version of Bretonnia I'm going to be looking at is the one that's included, if we just go to the mods, in Somber Warhammer 1.26. So this is a compilation that has all of the Warhammer nations that I am updating. The majority of the work in there is mine, but some of the graphics have been done by some other modders, and that is the case for Bretonnia. It was originally made by a modder called Burnsaber, and he's done the majority of the graphics in it. Many of the descriptions will have been written by him, and the original code will have been written by him. And that was for Dominions 3, and I think he also made a version for Dominions 4, although I can't totally remember. So the version that's included in 1.26 of Somber Warhammer is 0.31 of Bretonnia, so that's what I'll be talking about. And of course, you could get the mod and run it individually. You don't have to have all of the Warhammer nations in that compilation pack, but this is more convenient for most people. So we're just going to have a look at that. So I've created a game using the Somber Warhammer compilation pack. I've selected Bretonnia, and this is the national overview for the nation. And we can look at the pretender selection that's available as well in a moment. But first, let's have a quick run through of the national features. So they've got expendable peasants, powerful heavy cavalry, including some flyers, and sacred grail knights. So this is their knights and peasants, the kind of duality of their military. And they cannot recruit mercenaries. What that means is just that the mercenaries are extremely expensive. So if you go to recruit one of them, you'll find that it costs, I think it's 10 times as much as for any other nation. So effectively not worth recruiting or cannot be recruited. They've got nature, water, air, with a bit of astral and earth magic, and they've got powerful priests that may be protected by guardian spirits. So this is the function that's in Dominions 5 that's used by, I think Ashdod has it. A couple of the nations have this feature where if the enemy is sufficiently dangerous and you have priests present at a battlefield, then they have like a percentage chance for each of them of generating a guardian spirit that will help them. In the case of Bretonnia, it's this kind of ghostly knight that appears and protect your various priests who are your mages. And then there's an extra section for special mechanics. Pilgrims gather at temples according to Dominion strength. So also have cheaper temples. You can see they cost 300 rather than 400, although your labs are 700 rather than 500. So quite expensive to set up forts with labs and start cranking out extra mages, and that's really something to bear in mind with the nation. This is really thematically because they're much more of a religious nation than one that respects magic. They're very tied together, and the magic is very strictly controlled by the damsels and maidens that are controlled by the Lady of the Lake. And a spoiler here is that the backstory of this in Warhammer is that it's actually the Wood Elves who have manipulated this entire human nation. The Lady of the Lake is one of the Wood Elf goddesses, I believe. Somebody who's a Warhammer lore nerd can probably correct me on that. But basically, they fashioned a human nation, which is largely they've created their kind of religions and mythology and culture so that the human nation will act as a shield to protect the Wood Elves, so kind of isolationist. It also stops the Bretonians from interfering with them too much because they're very afraid of the Wood Elves that live in Athel-Loren, and their various laws kind of prevent them from messing around with them too much. But yeah, the Guardian Spirits can be very useful, and we'll take a look at those in a moment. A thing that I try to do with all of my mods is that I'll put in some extra sites, which appear here grayed out, and the purpose of these sites is to show you things that wouldn't normally appear in the national overview. So for instance, this is showing you the Bretonnian Dukes, which is a special mechanic that I'll get to. This is showing you Paladin and Lord upgrades. This is going to show you Bretonnian free spawns, that's kind of pilgrims and things that appear in the temples. And then there's one that shows you multi-heroes, and there's a site that shows you the Luck independent heroes. And of course, if you right click on these, you can see the that appear. So this is the heroes that would appear for Bretonnia. The reason that there's these Luck independent heroes is that I kind of disagree with the Dominion's practice of tying the likelihood of interesting, unique national heroes appearing, these kind of famous figures from the nation's history or present, to the luck scale. So if you want to have a pretender who takes misfortune, because that's the way that you want to have your build, I think you should still have heroes show up. So what I've done is used events to separate these particular types of hero, the ones that are kind of unique one-off heroes, from the luck scale. So even if you've got misfortune 3, where normally you would have no chance of any heroes turning up ever, you can still get these heroes. You're still just as likely to get them. You will be much less likely, in fact, you will not get any of the multi-heroes. Multi-heroes are very special kind of heroes that can turn up, but they're not one-offs. They just represent like a powerful commander that can turn up and help you. And that is tied to the luck scale. So let's just go through their units first. So starting off at the far left, we've got the light man at arms. This is a peasant, and so they count as a slave. Slave on its own doesn't do much except that it means that they'll get a boost to their morale if they're led by a taskmaster, and they have halved upkeep just built in. So at gold 6 and halved upkeep, these are incredibly cheap units. You basically just use them as cannon fodder. You can also use them for things like patrolling, because they're not undisciplined, so they don't have any penalty to patrolling, they don't have any penalty to siege defending, they don't have any penalty to siege strength. So for 6 gold, you can get something that can do some good patrolling. It can give you some siege strength, and it can give you some siege defense. So that's actually a very useful unit, but just because it's so cheap, it's cheaper than most militia, and it's a little bit able to fight. I think attack skill 8 is pretty terrible, of course, and defense skill 12, even with the fairly large shield. So the feudal shield they use is kind of halfway between a normal shield and a kite shield, I think, but it's not particularly great. So just kind of very cheap. The only real cost there is kind of recruitment points at 7. Very low resources. Not going to get up to very much in a fight, but you can certainly, especially with their shields, use them to screen against flankers. You can use them to hold the enemy in place while you use spells, or where stronger troops get into place. But I think the real benefit of a unit like this is for the purposes of patrolling, sieging, things like that, or holding walls up. Just giving you the warm bodies, basically. So let's move on to the next one. So this is another man-at-arms. So the first one here is the light man-at-arms. This is the man-at-arms. Both of these can be recruited outside of forts. So you don't have to have a fort to build these. Although they are cheaper than most indie troops, they're not necessarily better than indie troops. So this man-at-arms is a little bit more expensive, just by 1 gold, but that's quite a lot when you're talking about 6 to 7. It's quite a big jump. It's got the same stats. I think the morale is the same, is it? No, it's 1 better morale because they're slightly braver because they're a bit better equipped. And they've actually got okay protection, considering that this is in the middle era. This is where the nation is. 9 is not the worst protection, given they've got this feudal shield as well. So these guys are basically, if you want a little bit braver man-at-arms, and if you are happy to spend more resources. Because they are resources 9 and the other was resources 5. So while the recruitment points is the same and the gold only slightly higher, you're paying quite a few more resources, so you're a bit more restricted in how many of these you can crank out. And I quite like these. If you just want the bodies, obviously the light man-at-arms is the way to go, but having that bit of extra armor certainly keeps them alive a lot longer as blockers or as chaff. So I prefer them as chaff, but obviously just for the purposes of patrolling and things, you just take the light man-at-arms. So the next is the peasant bowman. Now, unlike the man-at-arms, the peasant bowman is undisciplined, which means that you can't give it any orders. You can't order it to hang around. You can't order it to guard commanders, anything like that. Undisciplined troops will just do what they feel like doing. And in the case of the peasant bowman, what they feel like doing is probably shooting at the nearest target with their bows. But they do have a short bow, and they are a way of fielding a short bow with a strength 10 unit, so a 9 damage piercing attack, for 7 gold. So if you can get flaming arrows off, this is a great unit to use with that. For any other purpose, I wouldn't really recommend them. I guess if you know that you're coming up against just hordes and hordes of stuff that you want short bows against, things with very low protection or things that you have to use missile attacks against, then maybe you could use them. They are very cheap, like the man-at-arms, they're a cheap way of just getting bodies, but they're even worse at fighting. I mean, attack skill 7, defense skill 7. If they get into melee with anything, they will get mulched almost instantaneously, and their protection is terrible, of course, too. So, yeah, not at all a melee unit, and quite situationally useful, I would say. So then we've got the heavy man-at-arms. So we're going up another point of gold. The cheapest, of course, was 6. Now we're up to 8. A lot more resources. 16 now getting into the more of a resource sink unit. But the thing that's very interesting about the heavy man-at-arms, well, there's two things really. The first is that they have castle defense bonus of 1. This is a common thing in Dominions with anything that has a halberd. Basically, Illwinter have decided that people with halberds are good at guarding castles. So they have that castle defense bonus, and that means that their siege defense is at 1. 1 siege defense for 8 gold, very, very attractive. So that's good. But they also have another good thing here in the form of the halberd, because that is 22 damage. Even though they're not very accurate, they have 1 extra attack skill, 1 extra defense skill over the worst men-at-arms. These guys have a little bit better training. 22 damage is nothing to sniff at, especially when it's piercing and slashing. So it alternates between, well, not alternates, it's randomized which of the two it's doing in a given turn. When it's piercing, it's better at getting through armor. When it's slashing, it's better at dealing with things that have a bit less armor. But yeah, they can actually whack pretty hard. And if you get enough of them together, they will land hits on things eventually. If you're fighting things that have low defense and good protection or lots of hit points, I think they're well worth considering to just put out these inaccurate but high damage for the gold cost attacks. So yeah, not bad. Also 13 protection, pretty decent for the middle era. Next in the man-at-arms lineup is a unit that's not actually a man-at-arms at all. It's a yeoman. So the yeoman is much more of a kind of normal infantryman. So he's got normal stats like attack skill 10, defense skill 10 base, and 8 morale. It's still bad, but we do have some taskmasters, and he is a slave. We're going to look at the commanders and see how much extra morale you'll actually be working with. But I think you can functionally get him to 10 morale pretty often. And these guys have 13 protection as well, so pretty tough, and they have a shield. So the yeoman is kind of, so far, the most reliable troop that we've looked at. They also have a castle defense bonus of 1. So like the halberdier, specifically good at doing castles, and this is because their training is specifically to look after castles while the knights are off adventuring and doing their various things. They're the most trusted commoners, essentially, is what we're looking at here. They take more recruitment points, they take quite a few resources, bit of a resource sink, but yeah, I think they're quite useful. They're probably the best for just holding a line if you're not using knights at all, like with a cheap unit. If you're expecting to get hit with lots of things that are armor negating, things like that, these give you decent amount of hit points and they're not as likely to run away as the other peasants. Yeah, I think they're one of my kind of least built units out of the peasant lineup, but they're not bad as a resource sink. And the final peasant troop that we're going to look at is the longbowmen. So Bretonnia is a nation that gets longbows. That in itself is a nice advantage. They're not quite as good as they used to be in Dominions 3 and 4, but in Dominions 5 they're still quite good. They have good long range, so you can put these guys quite far back. Obviously they work well with flaming arrows because you can fire from long range. They're not undisciplined, unlike your short bows. Their morale is fine. Their stats are, bad for melee, but precision 10 and a longbow, that's fine for missile attacks. Yeah, it's basically a fairly cheap longbowman. It's a way of fielding a longbow. Don't really have much more to say about it. I think that one of the things about longbows, if you don't have flaming arrows going, that's nice with the Bretonnian knights, is obviously knights have quite high protection. They've got good armor, and they often have kite shields as well. So the longbowman's not going to inflict much in the way of friendly fire. I tend to use them in small groups, and I'll just have them on fire archers to just kind of keep my opponent honest and maybe pick off some of their cheap archers or crossbowmen. So now we're moving into the knight units. So the first is the cheapest one, the Foot Knight Errant. 12 gold is pretty cheap for what amounts to a kind of very budget elite infantry. They have good stats. They have morale 13. Of course, that's reduced by 1 by them being undisciplined, but still, morale 12, nothing to sniff at. They have decent attack skill of 11. They have a good weapon in the form of the broadsword. It gives them +1 attack and defense. It is length 1. It doesn't hit super hard, but it hits hard enough. They have strength 10. They've got excellent protection. So they've got protection 18 and a kite shield. So very, very durable for a 12 gold unit. And they don't cost a lot of resources. And this is because I've put the mechanic in Bretonnia, whereby the resource costs of their various knights and things are decreased. The justification that being that their family holdings provide them with arms and armor passed down for generations. The reason that I did this is partly just so that with Bretonnia you do have the option of just not going into production, because I think that Bretonian society is not really an industrious society. It's not that it isn't hard working, it's more that it kind of fits into the idea of sloth being like inefficiency, and the Bretonnian society is very inefficient. It's designed to have lots of these poorly educated masses using kind of outdated technology and just pumping their resources into supporting this feudal system with knights sat at the top. Now, the crucial thing about knights errant really is that they are undisciplined, means you can't give them orders, so they're kind of a point them at the enemy, they go off and they just do their own thing because they're very impetuous. And yeah, it's quite unusual to have kind of an elite infantry that behaves like that, but it's factored into their cost. So basically, you're getting budget infantry, but you can't really control them. But they are, they're pretty reliable in terms of how they'll do in a fight. I mean, good stats and primarily just really nice protection, especially for the resource cost. So yeah, I do end up building quite a few of these. I think they're just very, very decent infantry that you can rely on to make a good account of themselves in battle. So moving one up in terms of the eliteness, we're now into the Foot Knight of the Realm. So this is basically very, very similar to the Knight Errant, except it has a castle defense bonus. It has a patrol bonus, which is important because it's 15 gold, so you wouldn't be patrolling with a unit this expensive, but you might do, given that it's got current patrol strength of 2.1 patrol strength for 15 gold. It's not terrible. So they're quite flexible. They can patrol. They can defend castles rather well. They're kind of a good mainstay. They've got the same great protection that the Knights Errant have. They've got the same kite shield. They're a little bit stronger. Their stats are slightly better, basically across the board. They have better morale. And they're not undisciplined, which means that you can do things like guard commander, hold an attack, tell them which targets specifically to go after. There's a bunch of things that you can do with them. And I think that they're pretty good heavy infantry. I think that there's equivalent heavy infantry you can get for Dominion's nations that's maybe like 14 gold, 13 gold. So they're a little bit expensive in gold, but you're just not really paying very much in resources still for this great protection. So yeah, I think a very usable unit, and kind of if you want to hold the line and grind the enemy down and kill them, fantastic for that. Much, much better than just using lots of peasants, of course. But yeah, much more expensive if they start taking the casualties. And of course, they're quite slow because of their heavy armor. So something to bear in mind is that if they do get broken, if you have like a side route, they're probably going to get chopped up as they try to retreat. Next up, we have a sacred, which is build anywhere, and it's cheap. And obviously, as soon as you have a build anywhere cheap sacred, you start thinking of all the weird blesses you can take that make advantage of that. Things that go off when they die, death explosions, blood vengeance. Maybe you want to start putting a fire shield on them because they're going to be taking so many hits from the enemy. There's a lot to consider there, but let's just have a look at what the unit itself is like. So it's a slave, so you can get the extra morale from Taskmaster, and it has again halved upkeep, so it has halved for being sacred and halved for being slaves. These are very low upkeep units. They're not very expensive. They can do the usual things of holding up, giving you siege strength, giving you a bit of siege defense, although they are undisciplined, which means they're not very good for siege defense. So more of a siege strength unit, really. They're okay in a fight. They use a broadsword. It's a decent weapon. They've got 11 strength. Their stats are, bad infantry stats, basically. They are somewhat tough. They have okay head armor. The Iron Cap's good, and then the Rusty Ringmail Halberd is not great armor, but for the Middle Era, 10 is okay. Yeah, they're really kind of a chassis for using a good bless. That's the way to think about them. And they're cheap, so you can just keep cranking them out. You have cheap temples, so you don't need a lab or anything to get these going. So once you've got your second fort up, it can just be making battle pilgrims to go along with your other units. They might even be a reason that you would consider taking a high Dominion score. And the fact that you can take a high dominion score and then you also have these national mechanics like the free spawning of pilgrims. Yeah, you might want to consider that. The pilgrims that you get from free spawn, I think, are mostly not battle pilgrims. We can look at that in a moment. They're mostly the other type of pilgrim. And we can find that in Bretonnian free spawn. So let's just have a quick look there. So battle pilgrims, we've already seen those. Those are your recruitable sacreds. But then you also get pilgrims. These guys are not sacred, and they suck basically. Really, their only use is the fact that they are very, very cheap. They're 7 gold each. You don't have to pay the gold because they're free spawned, but then their upkeep is halved. So they're cheap. They throw sticks and stones, which works well with flaming arrows, I suppose. They have okay strength. They can fight a bit with their quarterstaff, but mainly it's just the fact that they're free. Their morale is okay. I mean, 11, and then it gets boosted with Taskmaster if you've got somebody with Taskmaster leading them around. Although it does get -1 for being undisciplined. Yeah, they're fodder that you get. But if you have high dominion, you will end up with these, especially if you build a lot of temples. So let's just keep moving on through these recruitable units. So now we're into the cavalry, and your worst cavalry, your only peasant cavalry, is the mounted yeoman. So I guess technically not a peasant. 20 gold, so we're talking cheap light cavalry here. And I do mean light. They've only got 9 protection. They do have a shield. It's not like a kite shield or anything. It's just a basic shield. They have a spear. They have a javelin. They have a hoof, which not all light cavalry do. So they do get 2 attacks in each combat round. I think that these are kind of a bit underrated by people that play Bretonnia, because obviously Bretonnia's main thing is their fantastic heavy cavalry. But 20 gold, they're not bad. I don't think that you would want to use them in expansion because their protection's low enough that they will just take attrition. But if you just need some troops that are moving, quickly from one place to another, you need to get over to the other side of Empire and defend against something. You need some flankers. These guys can work just fine. They just have your basic stats, and they're cheap. It's really as simple as that. Having the javelin is nice too because you can do, fire archers, and they'll kind of try to run to the back to get to the archers, throw their javelins, and then go into melee. Yeah, not a bad little unit. Then we have the Knight Errant. So this is the mounted version of the Knight Errant we were looking at earlier. So again, it's undisciplined. You can't control what they do. And because they're mounted, that means that instead of kind of ambling into battle and maybe it being a bit easier to organize, these guys will just tear headlong into the closest thing, just full speed, smash into it. And here is where we see a couple of things that are special about Bretonnian knights. So the first is that they use the Breton Heavy Lance. So this, compared to an ordinary lance, is basically just some extra damage. That's the thing. I think maybe the attack bonus of 1 is also something that is not used in an ordinary lance. I would have to check that. But basically it's an improved lance. And the lance is already a really, really good one-shot weapon. So the Breton Heavy Lance really allows you to, on your impact of your charge, just absolutely skewer something, just blow holes in even very tough things. You've got the attack skill of 11 base there, so it's attacking at 12. It's not going to be 20 damage, it's going to be a lot more than that because of the big bonus you get on your first charge with it. Then they've got a broadsword, a good weapon. And then finally they have a Destrier hoof, which is an upgraded version of the basic hoof attack that a lot of special cavalry get. And yeah, it's just extra damage, basically. Simple as that. But that's very welcome. I think the normal hoof does 13, so going up to 15 is nice, helps you get through tougher armor, helps you just do more damage in general. Now, these guys combine really nice precision, really nice defense skill, and low cost. It's a winning recipe when it comes to heavy cavalry. The problem with them is that they're undisciplined, and so you can't do things like attack rear. You can't do things like hold and attack to coordinate with your infantry. You just have these guys tearing straight into the enemy. And they cost quite a lot of recruitment points relative to their resources and gold. So this is probably going to be where your squeeze is on recruitment points. If you go for the more expensive cavalry, I think you pay maybe getting more onto the gold being higher than the recruitment points. I'm not quite sure. We'll have a look at that in a moment. But yeah, you can expect these guys to do great. You can expect them to absolutely mulch things on the charge, but of course you can't really tell them what to go for. Next is the Mounted Knight of the Realm. So we've lost the castle defense bonus because they're mounted, they're not infantry. And we have gained a patrol bonus of an extra 1. So they're pretty good patrollers, although I don't know that you would want to use these units for patrolling. If we look 3.6. 3.6 for 35 gold, I guess that's okay. Yeah, it's fine. Now, these guys are basically the same as the Knight Errants, except I think they have very slightly better stats, as we looked at before, and of course they're not undisciplined. So basically, you're just paying a premium for them to not be undisciplined. They're still pretty nasty in terms of recruitment points, so you're probably going to take order scales or maybe growth scales to allow you to have enough points to get enough of these guys out. But yeah, they're very good heavy cavalry. You're basically getting better heavy cavalry than like independent heavy cavalry and knights and things like that. Really can't hold a torch to these guys. They are very decent. Then we have a flying cavalry, the Pegasus Knight, and it's fairly unusual to have a flying unit available in your just basic recruitment. And so they are quite expensive. They're paying a premium for the fact that they're flying, but they have the same stats basically as the Knight of the Realm. They've got a bit better magic resistance, I believe. They have the heavy lance. They have a Pegasus hoof, which is equivalent to the Destria hoof. They've got the same kind of protection and everything, same patrol bonus. Basically, the reason that you would get these is because just having flyers on the battlefield allows you to do some stuff that makes it very hard for your opponent. So if you are hold and attack rear, you don't have to worry about things on the flanks blocking you from attacking rear. You just come plummeting down. You come plummeting down and you skewer them with a Breton heavy lance, which is a very nasty thing to hit them with. Yeah, they add a lot of they make things difficult for your opponent. I wouldn't say that they're like fantastic for expansion or anything like that. You know, you're paying quite a lot just for the fact that they fly. So if they're just sitting there swinging at things, bashing away back and forth with things, then they're less good than Knights of the Realm, or even I think Knights Errant would be a better bet because you can get 2 Knights Errant for the cost of 1 Pegasus Knight. They cost quite a lot of recruitment points, but their gold is so high that that's now the bottleneck usually. So yeah, I think the main reason to have Pegasus Knights is unless you're combining with a flying commander, in which case you get the big kind of strategic movement of a flying commander and flying troops allows you to do some very long distance attacks and responses on the strategic level. But in a battle, their thing is that they can just go and attack the rear, go and attack archers, and they just fly over the troops that would be in the way. And that just the fact that you can do that, or the fact that you show your opponent to do that in a multiplayer game, can mean that they have to do a lot of guarding against something that you may not even do, which is inefficiency on their part. So I'm rather fond of the Pegasus Knight, but I wouldn't make entire armies out of them or anything. I think they're just a more of a niche tool, but something that you want to show to an opponent in a multiplayer game, or just spring on them as a massive surprise and do a huge amount of damage to them in a battle. Then finally, we've got the Capital Only Sacred, and I think that this is the unit that people get excited about when they look at Bretonnia. This is the kind of marquee unit for the nation, and it's the Grail Knight. So these are knights who have completed their quest to drink from essentially the Holy Grail, the Grail of the Lake, I think it's called, and they've been granted supernatural power. Because they've been granted the supernatural power, they've got supernaturally good stats. I mean, they're very similar to like the Knight of Avalon, which is the Man super elite heavy cavalry, but they are sacred. They take a number of blesses rather nicely. Any bless that puts their defense skill up more, any bless that allows them to have extra protection or extra reinvigoration to keep them in the fight for longer. A fire shield even would work fine with them. If you get a strong bless on them, these are absolutely terrifying units, and you just want as many as you can, really. In the recent Skaven Blight game that I played, I fought against Bretonnia. They had a good bless, pretty solid bless on their Grail Knights, and they were just a nightmare. I had to use very specialized things to deal with them, but I knew that they would always inflict a huge amount of damage. They can, they're fast. They can move around the strategic map very quick. There is a limitation though when it comes to that strategic map, which is that they are magic beings. They have drunk from the Grail. They are no longer really human. They are something more. And because they're magic beings, you need a magic leader to move them around. So early on, that can be a bit of a problem because your basic leaders do not have magic leadership. They're just lords, paladins, dukes, princes. They're humans. They don't have the ability to command these magical heroes of Bretonnia, but the Grail Maidens and things do. But of course, those are your mages, and you don't necessarily want them having to lead expansion parties around, wasting their time doing that. But then again, those are also your priests. Those are the people that you need there blessing them. So, yeah, it can be a bit tricky. I think it might even be worth sometimes building some of the, forging some of the magical items that give you magic leadership just to move Grail Knights around with like your prophet, if your prophet's just a mundane commander. So yeah, a little bit limited in strategic movement because of that, and of course they do get some vulnerabilities from being magic beings, but they also have 14 base magic resistance, which is very nice. And they also just have fantastic stats and absolutely just blender things, just absolutely wreck things. In fact, in addition to being blenders, and by blender I mean something that'll just sit there and hack things up with its sword and just put out 2 very damaging attacks every turn, they also, of course, are lethal even to things that have very high protection. So if your opponent has they've taken an Awake Titan or something along those lines, or very beefy high protection troops, they're not safe just by having very high protection or even just very high defense, because you have an attack 13, 24 damage, and then extra from it being a heavy lance attack. So you can be blasting them in the face for like 40 damage on that first strike. It's terrifying, particularly if you take a blast that adds even more to strength and attack skill, which might be worth doing, to be honest. Yeah, so very nasty and something that people really go in for a lot. The only thing I would say about them is that I don't tend to go that much in for super blesses on things like this because they're already so expensive and they're already capable of doing a lot. They don't necessarily need a big bless. Oh, and the fact they've got affliction resistance 1, so this is slightly misleading. You'd think that might be like, oh, they've got 1% less chance of getting an affliction. No, that actually means they've got a halved chance of getting an affliction. So yeah, 50% of the time, if they would get an affliction, missing an eye, have an arm chopped off, battle fright, anything like that, they just don't get it instead, and that can make them a lot better for expansion as well, or just ongoing like your first war, because they don't get ground down by the attrition of taking all these afflictions. So before we move on to looking at commanders and the magic, I thought I'd just look at some of the units that are in the sites that show you things that are not in the normal national overview because they're not straightforward and recruitable. So the first is to just go back to the Bretonnian Freespawn. We have questing knights that appear in addition to battle pilgrims and pilgrims. And questing knights are knights, Bretonnian knights who have taken this vow to go and go on this big epic quest, given up their land, their holdings temporarily at least, to go and find the Grail and become Grail knights. A lot of them die along the way, but some of them make it. These are ones that are on the way currently, and you'll find that they turn up in your provinces. You'll have an event that's something like get some unrest, you lose some gold because a monster has been terrorizing the countryside, or bandits, or greenskins, something like that. But it's been defeated, and the questing knight has emerged and is now serving you. So you basically just randomly get some questing knights, and they're very nice. They've got better stats than even Knight of the Realm. They're an upgrade over those. They have strength 12. They have a two-handed weapon because they've set aside their lance, which is a symbol of landed responsibility and a normal position in the hierarchy of Bretonnia. And they've taken up this two-handed heroic blade. Now, the nice thing about this, of course, it's a big two-handed weapon, so it does a lot of damage, and they can just keep dishing that out. It's not a one-off thing like the Breton heavy lance, but also it has a secondary effect of slaying, which is 6 damage. The strength of the wielder is not added, so if you're hitting like a basic heavy infantry, let's say that's got like protection 16, something like that, 6 damage, not going to do very much. But if you're hitting something that's larger than you, so remember you're size 3 because you're a cavalry, but a giant is size 4, suddenly you're getting an additional 18 damage attack that's put on anything that you manage to do damage to. So if you hit them and do damage with your heroic blade, then they also have to roll their protection against an 18 damage extra attack from slaying. So if you're fighting a giant and the giant has protection 12, let's say, you hit him with the heroic blade, you do some damage, you might also end up doing, another like 7, 8, 9, 10 damage just from the slaying effect. So yeah, not bad. Helps them kill things that are big, which is very thematic. They have great protection, they have great morale, and they even have good magic resistance because of the vows that they've taken, kind of elevating them and making them harder to damage. Harder to affect with hostile magic, I should say. Yeah, they're very nice. They're not something that you can rely on having a lot of because they just turn up randomly. And yeah, I'm still kind of tweaking how much they turn up, but I think they turn up about the right amount now. So you get a handful of them every now and then. Let's say maybe you get like one, maybe you get 2 every 3 turns, something like that. And yeah, they can just appear in random places, so they're not reliable. You have to send somebody to go and collect them a lot of the time, but they don't require magic leadership, so it's not too onerous to do that. And sometimes they appear in a province just before it's attacked, and you get a questing knight just helping you unexpectedly in a battle, which is rather nice. So that is all of the troops, and now we're going to move on to the commanders. So we've talked about the unit, now let's talk about the commanders. So firstly we have your basic scout. These are not recruitable anywhere, they're only recruitable in forts, so they don't have the advantage that some of the Warhammer nations have, which is recruitable anywhere scouts. But they are quite good scouts in the sense that they've got very high map move. So if you need things to ferry gems around, things like that, that's decent for those purposes. But they do cost a little bit more than scouts usually would. And I don't think they're particularly stealthy. Yeah, they've got 10 above the lowest amount of stealth. So that's fine, just a scout to move things around. Then next we have a paladin. The paladin is your basic 1 recruitment point military commander. They have inspirational. They don't have taskmaster because they're not specifically the type of military commander that will be leaving lots of peasants around. Their job is more kind of leaving small forces of knights and kind of doing special missions for the dukes or the king. They are pretty good at fighting, obviously. Got very nice protection. They've got the classic good weapons of the Bretonnian knights, and because this is a Warhammer nation, and I tend to make military commanders kind of a bit more heroic and powerful in battle, they've got both Unsurroundable 2, which just means that they get less harassment penalty from being attacked multiple times, and they're mounted, so those kind of stack together and make them a bit more difficult for multiple units just overwhelm. So their defense skill is more relevant. And they've got increased hit points, 18, which is well above what a normal human would have. Usually, a tough human commander might have like 12 or 13, I think. Like the Black Lords of Ulm are some of the toughest, and they have maybe 14, I think. So yeah, potentially you could do a little bit of thugging. You could give them some items and use them for that. I wouldn't really recommend it because I think that's still not a great idea. They're still vulnerable to lots of things. They only have 13 magic resistance. It's okay, but it's it's not super safe. Maybe if you just had a cheap item you could throw on one, it wouldn't be too bad. Then we have courtiers. Courtiers are spies. They're not particularly cheap spies, but they are spies. Having spies is nice because it gives you the ability to see more about the provinces you're passing through than you would with a scout. You can cause some unrest by kind of rabble rousing, and you can infiltrate an enemy capital and get mundane graphs from them. Only mundane graphs because they're not mages or priests or anything. You would get scores on their army graphs, army size, number of provinces held, income, things like that. But they are 2 recruitment points each, so you can't just build a massive horde of them. I think they're kind of a very niche thing. Sometimes you might want a spy to go and do some stuff for you, but they're not terribly, they're not a great feature of the nation or anything because Bretonnia is really not that into spies. But it's nice that it has something there. Then we've got the Lord, which is basically like an upgraded paladin. Except they've got a couple of their own features. So they're very tough, 27 hit points, good stats for fighting. They have Unsurroundable 3, so even harder to get overwhelmed by just chaff. And they've got Taskmaster 1. So that gives a bonus to the peasants that they're leading. So the peasants who were on morale, 7 or 8 go up to 8 or 9, which is pretty important. And then, of course, they get an extra +1 because they are good leaders. They can do formations, which is important. I believe the paladins cannot do formations. Yep, they're just 40 leadership. They do have inspirational 1, but yeah, they can't do larger formations. They can't do lines and the various different troop formations you can use. The Lord also has tax collector, which is important because if you're sending out a raiding force, or if you yourself get raided, having tax collector allows you to pick up the gold income from provinces without having to trace back to a fort. I believe it, only works in the province he's in. So you can have a force raiding off the Lord, and every province that he takes, even if it's not connected up to your forts and the rest of your empire, you will get the gold income from it. So that's quite nice. And that just kind of represents that they're these administrators, the ruling these independent fiefs a lot of the time, or fiefs. They've also got patrol bonus 5, although I don't think that's super relevant. It's kind of more of a thematic thing. Then you've got the Shepherdess commander, and this is kind of an interesting unit because for a low amount of resources, 1 recruitment point and 220 gold, you don't just get the Shepherdess commander, you also get 15 Shepherdess troops. And I believe, if I haven't included these in the so they're not in the free spawn. Yeah, so I should add that to the site so that you can see what Shepherdess troops are like before you actually recruit one of these. But basically, they've got staff slings and quarterstaves, much like the Shepherdess, and they've got nice armor, much like the Shepherdess. So you end up with a force that have got not particularly great ranged weapons and are decent in melee, but not amazing. But the main thing is that you're not paying much in the way of resources. You're not paying any rec points for the troops to get 15 troops straight away. So basically, you're swapping your command points to just quickly get like a force of missile troops who can also do an okay job in melee. And yeah, it's much like you're hiring mercenaries, which is the flavour of them. Basically, they're a boondoggle to allow the Bretonnians to get a kind of mercenary by just investing in gold and commander points into getting these troops quickly. They're not bad. I use them sometimes early on in the game. They can help a little bit, but they're not the best expanders because obviously the quarterstaff and the staff sling are not fantastic weapons. Staff slings are better than slings, but still not amazing. Yeah, so just an option for the early game, I think there. Or I guess in an emergency if you needed to get troops for doing a siege or holding up your own walls during a siege. Then we have another commander that comes with a variety of units. So this one, every time it's in battle, it spawns 4d6 pilgrims, which are the guys who throw sticks and stones. They're pretty useless, they're just chaff really, but 4d6, that's a lot. And then you get, that's 1 + 2 + 3 battle pilgrims, so 6 battle pilgrims in every battle. And battle pilgrims, of course, are sacred. They cost about 15 gold. So if you've got a good bless, this might be a good idea to bring along. It's 2 recruitment points. It's not itself a terribly good fighter or anything. And it's got this item, the Battle Reliquary. So it's a bunch of crazy Bretonnian fanatical peasants who are holding up the grotesque remains of a dead Grail hero, a Grail Knight. And so they're berserk always, but they're also always blessed. So this commander, you'll put it into battle. It spawns a bunch of chaff that will just be doing whatever they want, which means they'll just be charging into battle basically. And this will also be charging into battle, whether you like it or not, because it's berserk. It's got a lot of hit points, but as it takes damage, its forms, the people holding it up get killed, get picked off slowly, and it gets smaller and smaller until finally it's just kind of the remains of this Grail hero and can be destroyed. But in total, 96 hit points does make it fairly difficult to destroy. This is mainly kind of a weird, a weird thematic option. I don't think it's really great for expansion or something I would build too many of. It has an interesting feature in that it is an excellent taskmaster, but it has very low amount of leadership. So you can give it some of the slave units, which are the peasants. I think battle pilgrims are also slaves. Let's have a quick check, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, they're also slaves. So if you give it leadership over some battle pilgrims, and it's creating its own battle pilgrims, then they get very high morale. It also causes unrest wherever it goes because of this kind of rabble rousing going on. So potentially you can bring these along with a raiding party, and you might like the fact that you're causing unrest all over enemy lands. Yeah, it's kind of a difficult one to evaluate, but I think if you can keep it alive and have it in multiple battles, then you will benefit from having all these battle pilgrims and pilgrims. And yeah, that's the main use of it. I think if you've got the right kind of bless and a strong bless, then it would be good. Otherwise, just ignore it. But it's definitely worth trying out. So now we are on to the mages. So you have 3 mages. One of them can be recruited outside forts, which is obviously a very important and attractive feature of the nation. You've got your kind of basic build lots of me, I do research mage. You've got your mainline mage, and then you've got an expensive and slow capital only mage. I'll talk about Entreat Duke in just a moment. So let's start with the Grail Maiden, who is your cheapest mage. So for 100 gold, you get Holy 1, you get Water 1, and then you get either Air 1 or Nature 1. So Nature 1, Water 1, that's actually quite a nice cross path. It allows you to cast Moss Body. There's some self buffs that you can do with that. Water, Air, and Nature 1, all of those allow you to kind of do point buffing, which can be quite strong because Bretonnia has some expensive and powerful, and small in number troops like the Grail Knights. So there's a few things you can do there. Obviously, you can send these along to lead your Grail Knights, although they've only got magic leadership of 5. But they can bring along a few Grail Knights. 5 Grail Knights is quite enough to take out province defense, that's for sure. It's 300 gold, a significant investment. They can bless the Grail Knights, so they're good for just ferrying around these little groups for raiding potentially. Just generally very useful. The fact that you can build them when you don't have a fort, they do require a temple and a lab, and of course your labs are 700, but potentially you can skip out at least temporarily on like a second fort at the start of the game if you want to get your research rolling. You can just take a province, build a temple for 300, build a lab for 700, so that's 1,000 gold, and then you can start building Grail Maidens. But of course, they're 2 commander points each, which means that don't you will only be getting half of one each turn, basically, because you only have 1 commander point. So, yeah, you'd probably want to put up a fort anyway. So it's not hugely exciting that they're built outside of forts, but it is something worth considering. They are your most efficient research mage, I believe. I'm actually just going to go and do a quick bit of some sums on this just to make sure of that. Yes, so having gone and had a look and kind of crunched the numbers a bit, the Grail Maidens are slightly worse researchers than the shaman, the Lizardman shaman used by Katis, and that puts them really in some kind of the upper echelon of good, efficient researchers. Their paths aren't great. You don't want like a huge number of them and expect them to do things that aren't research. But if you just want to do research in a gold efficient way, they are very good at that. The metric I use is how many research points you get per gold point within 3 years, because I'm expecting that at some point the game ends, and so the fact that they're very research efficient over a long period of time may not be that relevant. And over 3 years, you get 1.6 research points per gold. So that's including their startup cost of 100 gold, and that's including their upkeep every month for those 3 years. So 1.6 is definitely good. Yeah, these are your main researcher. Then we've got the Grail Damsel, so that's twice the price at 200 gold. They have much better paths, and they've got priest level 2. So nature 1, water 1, air 1, so you can do all your kind of point buffing with those. But then crucially, they can get to level 2 in nature, water, and air. They could maybe get to level 3, but it's so unlikely that you shouldn't count on that at all. They can get Astral 1, which is pretty important because it allows them to do communions and gets you access into Astral. And they've got a potential of Earth 1 as well, which is nice for site searching, bit of forging perhaps, just for a little bit of diversity. So these are the mage that you will be building the most of. They're your mainline mages. They can cast some good spells in combat. If they get Nature 2, there's quite a few good things they can cast. Water 2 is not that exciting for combat, but yeah, it's not bad. If they're able to communion up, if you get some astral ones, they can use Power of the Spheres or communions to get their air magic to go up a little bit more. Yeah, there's quite a few things you can do with them, but they're a little bit trickier to use than a lot of mages. They're not one where you're just like, oh, okay, this isn't Earth 3 main mage, or these ones you'll often get Fire 2 or Death 2 or something like that, where there's a fairly obvious use of them. So you're going to get quite a mix of different paths. A lot of the time, you're going to get a spread of low-level paths. If, for instance, you've got Earth 1, then you've basically just got this set of kind of buffing paths, and you can't do a huge amount else, although you do have very nice cross paths for forging and things like that. Yeah, they're just a little bit lacking in raw magical power, but this is your main mage. They have 15 magic leadership, which is, of course, is very good for moving around the Grail Knights, and priest level 2, not super relevant, and I think that's something that people tend to not like seeing on their mages and dominions because it typically means that the mage ends up costing more just to justify the priest level that they've been given. But it does mean that they can cast Sermon of Courage early in the game, which could be useful if you've got a bunch of peasants or just for shoring up the morale on stuff. Maybe if you're fighting against a pretender who's got ore, to get around their ore tests. They themselves do have ore. They have ore 1. And that allows them to maybe survive if the enemy gets to them. They certainly can self-buff with the paths they have, so you could potentially turn one of these into a sort of a mini thug. You would give it something like If you have, yeah, you could get to cast Mist Form on it by getting the Air Magic up. You could cast Moss Body with Nature Water. You could maybe have a little group of them because you can fit 3 into a square, and they could Moss Body, and one of them could be Body Ethereal Caster. Maybe you would give them some items to help them kill things quicker. I'm not saying that's a great idea because they do have 0 protection straight off the bat, but potentially you could do something like that. It's something that you might want to play around with, and I think more advanced players might be able to do a bit better with the point buffing on these guys. Then finally, we have the capital only mage. So we're getting a lot more horsepower here. This is guaranteed 2 in each of these paths, which is absolutely crucial. And then, of course, we can get to 3 in nature, 3 in water, 3 in air. Those are all fantastic. And we can still have the minor astral and earth. So you could get the nature earth crosspath. You could get nature astral crosspath. So you can forge moonvine bracelets, which are a good astral booster you can get by doing that. Yeah, but these are your kind of strong combat mages. But of course, they're 400 gold, which is very expensive. They are rather, I would say, overpriced for what they're able to do, and that's partly just because Bretonnia is not really a magic nation. It's a Dominions nation, so it still has good mages and everything, but it's not one that leans extremely heavily on having fantastic mages. They're really more about their knights than anything else. Now, another feature they have is that they are both a healer and disease healer. I forgot to mention, but the Grail Damsels are disease healers. This can be very nice if you're Pretender. You've taken maybe a sleeping kind of thug Titan Pretender of some kind, and you can use healer to get rid of any afflictions they have. It can be nice to use with things like your Grail Knights, although they do have affliction resistance, they may pick up afflictions. If you're run across a disease site and something important gets diseased, it's good to have disease healer. It's really just a nice to have. It would be more important having healer 1 if you were doing mind hunt, because then you will end up with your mages getting feeble-minded, and then you can fix it with healer. That's kind of a very classic trick that Arcos Cephale likes to use. But you're not really a mind hunt nation. You can pretty much only get 1. Maybe you will get to 2 astral on your mages. It's not really a thing that you do. They have even stronger ore 3 is now getting very strong. So you could, again, I wouldn't recommend this because it's a 400 gold and quite fragile mage, very few hit points, and no protection built in. But you could do some sort of thugging with them, relying on the ore and the fact they can do some fantastic self buffs, and they're also sacred, so they get the bless. They are also a Fortune Teller 10. Fortune Teller, I think, is not terribly relevant except in very important provinces like your capital. It can avoid you getting certain events. Another thing in Dominions 5 that Fortune Teller does is sometimes it tells you when there's an upcoming event. Although, in my experience, usually it just tells you something that's not really something you can take advantage of. Like, it will tell you the Deathmatch Arena is coming up in a few turns, which is not really exciting to know about, but it's quite fun to know about at least. So, when you're not using these as your kind of premier battle mages, they're going to be sat in your capital. You're going to be, or maybe one of your other important provinces. You're going to be benefiting from Fortune Teller. Maybe you'll be healing and disease healing. If you have anything go wrong, you can send it back to those, and they can look after them. Also, just the fact that you've got a level 3 priest is pretty great because, of course, the name of the game is usually capturing thrones, and you need Holy 3 or a pretender to go and capture a throne. So, just having more Holy 3s available, very good for capturing thrones. Although, of course, because you've got plenty of water with this nation, you can also cast Bishop Fish, or another option for that. But you shouldn't really need them because you can have the prophetesses going out and capturing thrones for you. So the other rather odd-looking commander that you can recruit here, and this is also capital only, is the Entreat Duke commander. So what you get here, this little symbol itself, the stats here, not interesting. It doesn't do anything. It's not really capable of fighting. It's just this kind of mindless lump because it's just this icon. It's just an abstract representation. What you get when you entreat Duke, which costs 500 gold, 40 resources, and 2 commander points, so an entire cap turn of commanders, and a lot of gold, is you get a unique commander, and you get a pre-built mini army to go with that commander. So if you can do this early on, it can be very useful to overcome the fact that you're limited by resources and recruitment points on the troops, and maybe you don't at that moment necessarily need to hire a mage. but it is quite expensive. It might be, you know, an entire turn's income. It might slow you down getting a second fort, that kind of thing. You hire them. Now, in order to evaluate this, we have to actually consider what the dukes get in their mini armies, and I might do that kind of near the end of the video. I'm not going to do it now. I'll have a quick look at what you get. You know, what the dukes themselves are like, but not so much what they get in terms of armies. And it is slightly randomized as well, so sometimes this is a bit of a gamble. If you don't have any of the dukes remaining, there's how many are there? Yes, 12 great dukedoms, so there's 12 dukes. If you've done this 12 times, which seems very unlikely that you would do that during a game, but you could do, and all of the dukes are gone, then you will get a Grail Lord instead, and I think a few Grail Knights to go with them. But it'll be worth maybe slightly less than 500 gold, so it's not a great idea. But maybe in a very long game that would happen. I just put it there as a fail-safe. Oh, and something to warn you about, and something that I will in a future update add into this description to warn players about, is that if you recruit an entreat duke and on that same turn that you recruit it, your fort is put under siege, then you'll get the icon just sat there in your fort until you can relieve the siege, at which point the duke and the army will turn up. So it's a bad idea to recruit this if you're about to be sieged. If you're going, oh, I desperately need some soldiers and a military commander to fight because I've lifted the siege for a turn, but they're going to siege me again next turn, do not recruit the Entreat Duke icon. A player did that in the Skaven Blight game and then regretted it, and I felt quite bad about that because it doesn't specifically warn them. And it's because of the vagaries of the event system in modding that that's the case. So let's have a quick look at the Dukes. So the Dukes are listed here in this preview site. And you can see here is the 12 Dukes and then also a Grail Lord, which is the generic you get if you don't have any of these. So I'm just going to go through these very quickly. Each of them gets a thematic army that comes with them. You know, there's some dukes that are good at leading peasants; they get more peasants in their army. There's some that are famous for leading, elite knights, and they get more elite knights in their army. So we've got the Duke of Languille. They are, they've got some nice equipment. They're a good leader. They're not a magic leader because they haven't taken the Grail vow, and yeah, they've got some extra resistances against hostile magic, so you can potentially do some thugging with them. But other than that, they're a pretty normal kind of lord. The Duke of Gisaru, they are sacred and have awe because they have taken the Grail vow. They also have magic leadership of 40. Now that's very important because they can lead a lot of Grail Knights around, so very useful on that front. They've also got built-in reinvigoration, which can be quite exciting if you're using them as a thug, and very good stats, very tough. The Duke of Baston, another one that's taken a Grail vow, so they also have magic leadership. Basically, if they're sacred, then they're going to have magic leadership because they've taken the Grail vow. They can lead Grail Knights around, and they're also going to be magic beings. They've got built-in ore. They've got built-in very nice magic equipment, although you can give them extra stuff. Of course, you can't actually replace these, but you can give them extra stuff. Yep. So the Duke of Baston is one of the stronger ones that you can get. That's actually one that appeared in the Skaven Blight game I was playing. The Duke of Carcassonne, so not sacred, a very good leader, and Taskmaster 2, so really good to lead peasants around. There's the Duke of Brion. So they've got Fear, which is nice for potentially doing some thugging. They've got a special magic two-handed axe that they can chop stuff up with. That's very strong. Does magic damage. Does it have a secondary effect? Yeah, it does some extra fear. So kind of a fear thug potentially you could build here. But they haven't taken the Grail vow. Duke of Paravon is flying, which is very relevant for leading around the Pegasus Knight. I don't think you have any other. Oh, you do have a Pegasus Lord. Sorry, I forgot to mention him actually. So the Pegasus Lord is essentially a lord on a Pegasus. I mean, not much else to say there, but the fact that you have a flying commander who can then lead your flying troops is very relevant, and you can kind of thug them out, although they're not sacred. Yeah, so going back to the Dukes, we've got Paravon, who is sacred and can be a fantastic thug. They've got the affliction resistance and so on that the Grail Knights have. They can lead Grail Knights around, but you probably would want them either flying around on their own doing thugging with items, or maybe you would have them lead some Pegasus Knights. The Duke of Lyonesse, is very good at cast defenses and sieges, which is nice to have, but otherwise just another one of these kind of lordly leaders. Duke of Artois has got patrol bonus and is a good leader and has some nice built-in weapons. The Axe of Sharpness is very nice to have. I believe the Lance of Artois is also pretty tasty. Yeah, 2 attacks on a lance. You can only use it once, but 2 attacks is very nice and does some extra damage against large beings. The Duke of Aquitaine, another one of the Grail Knight leaders. They've got Inspirational 2 because of their banner that they carry, and crucially casts Arrow Fend on battle start. So very, very useful if you're coming up against a lot of missile fire or certain spells like Blade Wind and things. You can use Arrow Fend to help against those. So yeah, that's a very strong one to get. The stronger the Duke is, the fewer troops I tend to give them. So the weaker ones who are just kind of like, oh, I'm just a lord who's slightly better, I tend to have given them more of a built-in army that comes with them. Duke of Bordelot is Gift of Water Breathing. They can lead their troops underwater, which can be very useful for getting access underwater. Although, of course, anything that they take underwater, they'll be poor amphibians, and they, Sorry about that. My headset just cut out there. I was just saying that anything they take underwater will just be a poor amphibian through water breathing, and so it may not be the best thing for expanding underwater, but it does give you that option. The Duke of Montfort is defense organizer, so they will build up province defense as they move around. So basically, what you'll end up doing with them is that'll be their job, moving around, building up your province defense for free. They give you 5 every turn, but they can only go up to 19. But that's still pretty nice to have, and they're a good leader of peasants, especially. They've got Taskmaster +4, so you can build a very, much higher than normal morale peasant army with them. The Duke of Quesnel, I think that's pronounced. They've got a special weapon. They're another Grail Knight leader. They've got ore, just another very nice thug, basically. And then finally a Grail Lord, which is the generic version. A lot of the Dukes are just better than this, but they're still pretty good. Very nice for thugging, leading Grail Knights around, a good single combatants. They've got Unsurroundable 3. They've got the Affliction Resistance. So yeah, some nice options there. Of course, you won't get to choose which Duke you get. It's entirely random. It will just be one off the list, and then as you go through the list, you'll eventually run out and end up getting the Grail Lords. Now, another thing that happens to Bretonnia is that their lords and paladins can get these events that upgrade them. It's not based to their experience stars or anything that they're doing. It's purely random. It just happens sometimes that they decide to take the questing vow. And once they've taken the questing vow, they can then end up taking the Grail vow. So with paladins, they first turn into a questing paladin. They become generally stronger, but they change in role and they become not very good for leading things at all because they're off doing their quest instead. They can then become a Grail Paladin, and this is basically a commander who is a Grail Knight, so very good. Questing Lord, the Lord can take up the questing vow and become a questing Lord. Again, very strong but very little leadership. And you can also have those upgrade from a questing lord into a Grail Lord. This doesn't happen very much, so it's more of a thematic thing than something that you want to plan around, but it can end up with giving you some stronger leaders to go along with dukes and lords and things. I think this is a nation where, particularly because lords, which are good commanders and are potentially pretty strong thugs, they're 95 gold, but they're only 1 recruitment point, so you can get 2 from a fort in a turn. You can kind of do some mini thugging with these. And you should end up playing as Bretonnia, I think, with quite a few military commanders who are just, set to actually do some fighting. And yeah, that's, I think thematic and also mechanically I built it so that should be a good idea. Something that I will add in a future version is a preview site which will tell you what the Guardian Spirits are like, but basically Guardian Spirits are ethereal and, upgraded and strong, kind of Foot Knight of the Realm or actually, I think they might be sacred, so they're more like a kind of Grail Knight on foot, but they haven't got any feet. They're floating ghosty boys. They're very nice. They do very well. Yeah, I'll add a preview site which allows people to see what those are like. And I'll also add in that preview site a preview of the Shepherdesses that you get with the Shepherdess Commander. I do have preview sites for multi-heroes. So the multi-heroes you can get are a Grail Prophetess, which is just your cap-only commander. I do this as a matter of course for the main nations. If you have an expensive or slow cap-only commander, I let you also get it as a multi-hero. You can also get a Hippogriff Lord turning up. So this is a Grail Lord, basically, but mounted on a very powerful flying steed that makes them size 5 and makes them very, very tough. You know, they get some extra hit points if they get these extra attacks from the Hippogriff tearing things to pieces. If the commander mounted on the Hippogriff dies, the Hippogriff fights on for a bit and then it leaves at the end of the battle. You don't get to keep it. But with 40 hit points, you know, you've got a good chance of keeping them alive. They've got awe, they've got fear because they're riding on this big fearsome beast. They can be very good thugs, basically. I definitely would recommend putting some items on these and using them as thugs because just the ability to have a size 5 thug with good hit points, you know, can go and attack rear, can fight air elementals potentially, you know, that sort of thing. You then have the luck independent heroes. So these are the ones that don't care about your luck scale, and you've got a good selection of these. I'll just go through these quickly. So you have the King of Bretonnia, Leon Lincourt, and he is very similar to the Hippogriff Lord. He's mounted. He's got better kind of stats and things. He's, you know, a very strong thug and also a good army commander. He's got the very high leadership. He's got Inspirational 2, he's got Taskmaster 2, so even peasants will have good morale under him. It's a very strong leader and a kind of a centerpiece for your armies. Lots of hit points, great stats. He's got this built-in item that makes him permanently blessed, which is very nice because he's blessed, you know, even when he's not in battle, and you never actually have to go and bless him. So he can fly off on his own and without being blessed do thugging. He also has built-in regeneration, which is obviously a fantastic trait. So built-in fear, built-in regeneration, built-in awe, and recuperation. An absolutely incredible thug. Also unsurroundable 4, so very difficult for things to land hits on him unless they've got very high attack skill because of his very high defense skill. So yeah, just a terrifying flying monster. You can give him a better armor slot and you can give him 3 misc slots, but everything else is built in, so you can't replace it. Yeah, a fantastic hero to get. One of the rare ones, and I think you can't get him until a bit later in the game. You can also get the Black Knight, who is, again, a very strong thug, a good commander. He's got invulnerability built in, he's got fear built in. He's less powerful than Leon Lecoeur, and he's not sacred, but yeah, still pretty strong. You can, on a similar kind of story, get the Damsel of War, who is sacred, a good thug, a strong leader with Taskmaster Inspirational 2, and she casts anti-magic on battle start, which is very useful to have the ability to have that on turn 0 of the battle effectively, and without any magic involved, without any research. And of course, anti-magic is something that you would struggle to cast because you have Astral 1, but very unlikely to have Astral 2. So you can get to it, but it's a difficult struggle. So getting her is very nice. Plus, when you get the Damsel of War, you also get the Champion of the Damsel. So this is another thug, even stronger thug, who comes with her. Has built-in air shield or great stats. Just he's an absolute monster in combat. If you put some items on him, yeah, can absolutely wreck things. Another thug that you can have turn up is the Green Knight. So the Green Knight is immortal and they reform in battle sometimes, not always, but if they get killed in battle, they can come back. And yeah, ethereal, built-in regeneration, built-in fear, built-in awe. Absolutely terrifying. You know, they're sacred, they have great stats. Yeah, just a fantastic thug. So your heroes are basically this selection of extremely strong thugs. Each of them can do quite similar stuff. They can beat up potentially small armies on their own. Because they don't have magical paths, it's hard, unless you really equip them with a lot of items, for them to be army killers. But they can be fantastic raiders, and they can really supplement your armies and be good leaders. Although the Green Knight leads no one. They are just a thug. And then finally, you have the Fey Enchantress, who is your kind of super mage hero that can turn up. They've got a lot of really nice things. They've got a Dominion Spreader. They have a Healer 2, which is twice as strong as the Grail Prophetess's healing ability. They've got an extra 5 on their Fortune Teller ability, so they're kind of like an upgraded Grail Prophetess, basically. Also have invulnerability, have fear because of the Unicorn. And they have damage reversal, 12 versus magic resistance. Damage reversal is particularly amazing because, unlike Blood Vengeance, you don't actually take the damage that you reverse, you entirely ignore it, and the damage is just reflected back. And that will work on any source of damage, I believe. So, yeah, anything that doesn't have fantastic magic resistance and tries to do damage to the Fey Enchantress will end up just taking the damage themselves. Because she is a Dominion spreader, she's always blessed. And she's also another Holy 3, and she's got fantastic map move because she's mounted on a lovely unicorn. Although actually in Warhammer I think unicorns aren't lovely, I think they're kind of arrogant and horrible creatures, but having one as a mount is nice anyway. In terms of paths, she's not that different from a Grail Damsel. She's got guaranteed Nature 3, guaranteed Water 3, rather than just kind of a chance of having one or the other. Doesn't have any Earth, but she does have 2 Astral, and that can help you with the Moonvine Bracelet. I think you could then make Starshine Skullcap and get yourself to Astral 4. Yeah, she has a head slot. I think the Starshine Skullcap counts as a crown, so she potentially could wear it. I'm not sure about that. But yeah, just a fantastic mage to have, and obviously she can do some thugging with these paths and these abilities built in. So a quick addendum. While earlier on I mentioned that the Guardian Spirits and the Shepherdess units weren't appearing, I've now added a site. This will be in the next version of the compilation pack and the next version of Bretonnia, the mod that are released. I've just changed the Bretonnian free spawn site to be Bretonnian summons and free spawn, and you can now see the Guardian Spirit Knight and the Shepherdess there. So these are the units I was talking about earlier, so pretty decent protection and, you know, okay in melee, and they're okay at range. They're not great units, but of course that you're getting them without having to spend lots of resources. And these are the Guardian Spirit Knights that show up to defend your priestesses, your various damsels and maidens. But these will sometimes appear to protect them, which can be good in assassinations and is just generally useful in battles when they turn up, because you can see they're pretty nice. They've got protection even though they're ghosts, because they have ghostly armor. They've got good hit points, good stats, they hit very hard, and they also have the extra damage they do against larger beings because they are heroic in nature. Yeah, so pretty useful to have as a backup. So we've talked about the commanders, we've talked about troops, we've talked a bit about magic. I think the main other thing that I'd like to cover is just having a look at the pretender selection and maybe talk about scales a bit. And then that'll be everything for the nation. So to have a little look at their pretender selection, I've just made a new game, just see which chassis they have available. I'm really not going to go into a lot of detail here because I don't intend for this to be a guide to playing the nation. It's more just kind of an overview to pique people's interest and discuss the kind of things that they might use the different recruits and mages for. But you can see that you've got quite a large selection of Dominion 3 Titans, Titanesses in fact, because the Bretonnians basically worship female representatives of the divine. They've got the Lady of the Lake, they've got their, you know, the priestesses, the maidens, damsels, and prophetesses. So there's no representation for the guys here. This is Ladies' Night, pretender selection. We've got various Titanesses available. A lot of different paths. You can build a lot of blesses with these, and many of them being Titanesses, obviously, you would take them either awake or asleep, and then you would kit them out and go and beat up your enemies with them, and you could use them to respond to people invading in the first war, perhaps. That's usually what I like a Titan for, to scare people off from that first war, or rapidly respond to things you can't otherwise deal with. That gives you a bit more flexibility. We've also got access to a Sphinx, the Gorgon, which is a pretty rare pretender, I think, doesn't appear on that many nations, and the Virtue, which of course is famous for its ability to blind expand on turn 1 because it's got 25 invulnerability, which is effectively 25 protection, and or 5, which makes it very, very hard for indies to hit it at all, so it just slowly whacks them all down with the flambeau. So that's another nice option. In terms of their immovable structures, it's just the Oracle, Dominion 4. They don't have any of the statues or anything because those are all statues depicting men as far as I can see, so I selected just this. It's possible I'll add more pretenders to this selection, but something that is very unlikely is that I'll add modded, you know, custom pretenders. Like, I'm not going to add a Lady of the Lake pretender because the gods in Warhammer are generally more of an abstract concept, and I think that that's already, you know, the Lady of the Lake can be well represented by these existing pretenders, of which there are many. The Matrona of the Healing Spring, the Titan of Rivers, the Titan of Love. These, the Titan of Winds and Waves. These could all be representatives of the Lady of the Lake quite happily. You've also got things like the Great Enchantress, who could represent, a particularly powerful damsel or prophetess or similar. So, yeah, you've got. You could even do the kind of evil version of Bretonnia, perhaps Mucilon, which is their kind of cursed and slightly suspect fiefdom within Bretonnia, which has kind of got a lot of undead, and it's rumored to have vampires in the aristocracy. You could represent that by having a vampire queen, and that would give you obviously access to a nice chassis that's immortal and regenerates and so on, and also death and blood blesses, although at a very low dominion. And I don't think I would be very happy taking the low Dominion choices for the Pretender. I'd rather have Dominion 3 or 4 as a starting point. Maybe I would start with Dominion 2, because I do think that Bretonnia benefits quite a bit from having good Dominion. And I can talk a little bit about the events that you can get through having Dominion and the kind of odds of getting those free spawn troops at your temples. But let's just select the Oracle for now. I'm not going to go too much into blesses. Again, this isn't a guide, but I do think it is worth talking about the kind of scales that I would recommend. So Bretonnia is intended thematically. I think their scales are something like this. It's high order because they're a very rigidly structured hierarchical society. I think that they're slothful because they're inefficient. Although the peasants are extremely hardworking, they have to indulge in this they have to put up with this back-breaking labour foisted on them by their feudal overlords. They're actually organised in a very inefficient way, and that's by design. You can go for pushing your hot or cold scales one way or the other, but I think thematically 0 is completely fine. Thematically, it's quite a bountiful land, Bretonnia. There's plenty of growth, and of course that also contributes a lot of gold, which is going to be one of your main restrictions because your resource costs are somewhat reduced. And I think that given that you've got pretty efficient and cheap researchers, it's not a bad idea to take magic. Now, I don't know if I would take it all the way up to magic 3, but you could certainly justify, magic 1, 2, or 3. I think that's all fine. They're definitely not a drain nation. Now, generally speaking, it's my goal with these modded nations to make sure that things that are thematic, things that make sense for you to do, because you're playing as the Bretonnians, things like recruiting lots of military commanders and having them running off doing heroic things in battle rather than just sitting at the back. It's my job as a modder, I think, to make those things work mechanically for you, for them to actually be a good idea. So you don't get a dissonance between, oh, I'm supposed to be playing honourably, I'm supposed to be a nation which is ordered and maybe a little bit slothful, maybe has some growth, but actually a completely different set of scales would make sense. So you're kind of there's a tension there. There are some good tensions in game design where you can have the player make kind of an interesting choice, a modal choice perhaps, or some small choices along the way about what they're doing. But Dominions is already a game full of choices, full of tension, and I think it can be helpful to just have the mechanics fit the theme of the nation a bit more strongly, particularly in modded nations, because there's a lot of new units, there's a lot of new things for them to look at. Sometimes the mechanics are a little bit different, a little bit more complex to look at, and because that can be quite overwhelming, I do think it's a good idea to have sort of fairly obvious scales that you would want to go for, even if you're not having an obvious bless that would work well. And I think for Bretonnia, I would go something along the lines of, let's say that we're talking about an imprisoned oracle, so we're going to do some kind of bless. I'm just going to imagine that we're spending, say, we've got 12 points of magic that we're spending in our bless there. You could go even higher than that. I would take fairly high dominion because it enables a lot of the spawning events, and I'll show you those in a minute. I like to take high dominion anyway. Generally, I think it's a benefit to your peasants if you're using those to make sure that they've got good morale. It's good if you've got strong scales to make sure that they spread out nicely and you get them quickly in the provinces that you're taking over, particularly in expansion. So I think I would take something along the lines of high order. I think maybe I would only take the 1 point of sloth, and that's mainly because in the expansion phase, you do still need to have enough resources so that that's not the bottleneck on your making of troops. I would take growth. If we, slightly mess around with the paths, we could maybe take 3 growth, 2 magic. I'm not a huge fan of taking tons of luck if you're taking order because it's already decreasing the number of events. But I think taking 0 or 1 there is fine. So maybe scales would be something along the lines of this. We're just going to ignore the bless at the moment. There's lots of blesses you can pick, but I really don't intend for this to be a guide to blesses. So if we just hop along past this, and you can see on the first turn of the game, and this is something that again I'm trying to add into all of my mod nations, you get a little extra event here, a turn 0 event in addition to in the beginning there was chaos, now the wheel of turns once again. Here is a little introduction to Bretonnia. So I won't read this out, but basically it covers that your commanders can get upgraded, that you can sometimes have questing knights appear, and that you can have pilgrims turn up at your temples. And as it says, this will happen silently without triggering any message. So pilgrims, and sometimes you get battle pilgrims. And let's just have a look at, well, I'll keep this message up, but I'm just going to tell you about the odds of those things happening. So there are 3 events which are related to pilgrims appearing. That's your free spawn at the temples. The first has an 8% chance of happening in each province that has a temple for each candle. So if you had the full dominion of 10, which you almost certainly won't, but if you had 10 candles in a province, you would have an 80% chance of this triggering if you've got a temple in a province. And that gives you 1d6 pilgrims. So that's the basic event that's going to go off fairly often. So if you imagine maybe a kind of typical thing might be that you have a temple and it has 6 candles in it. So 6 times 8, that's a 48% chance each turn of that happening. So you'll get 1d6 kind of every other turn, pretty much, on average, of course. And that gives you a decent number of pilgrims that's putting out from your temples. And they're of course completely free. You do have to pay upkeep on them. I might in the next version actually reduce their upkeep even further. They're already slaves, so they have halved upkeep from their upkeep that would be based on their gold cost of 7. But I think I might reduce that even more, just so that you never have to worry about killing them off to avoid having to pay upkeep on them. I might take their upkeep down to nothing, or maybe 1 gold or something. So you also have an event which is at a 3% chance per candle, so less than half the chance of the other one, and it's the same thing. It's every turn in every province that has a temple, and that gives you 2d6 pilgrims. So sometimes you'll have these events that give you more pilgrims. You also might just roll high and just one turn end up with 14 pilgrims suddenly appearing. But again, it's based on the number of candles you have. The third event to do with the free spawn is a 2% chance per candle, and that gives you 1d3 battle pilgrims. So between 1 and 3 battle pilgrims. Battle pilgrims are much better than ordinary pilgrims, and that's per candle. So again, if you were 10 candles in your temple province, you would have a 20% chance each turn of getting for free 1d3 battle pilgrims. So I think these aren't something where you're going to end up with these massive hordes. It's not like the free spawn nations, like Asphodel to a lesser extent, but to a greater extent, Middle Age Ermor or Scalaria. Late Age, is it Scalaria? The one with the ghosts. I can't remember the name anyway. But it's not one of these free spawn nations where you're going to have these huge tidal waves of free things. But it is kind of worth bearing in mind that when you have temples and when you have higher dominion, you do end up with these free units. And that can be very welcome. You've then got your questing knight events, and there's basically for each province I think that doesn't have a fort, there's a chance of the first event is a 4% chance each turn of it causes some unrest, you lose some money, and you get 1d3 questing knights. The second event you get 2d3 questing knights. It's got a 2% chance of happening, and it generates more unrest and causes you to lose more of your tax money. And then the third event, you get a questing paladin leading a group of questing knights, and that's only a 1% chance of happening in non-fort provinces. And again, it increases the amount of unrest, but it also increases your dominion slightly in that province. Gives you an extra candle. So those are somewhat incidental, but make good use of the questing knights, and by having high dominion, you get more pilgrims and the like. So I think Bretonnia is an interesting nation if you want to play with lots of heavy cavalry. We can look at the recruit lineup, of course. We have all of our lovely heavy cavalry. You've got fairly cheap heavy infantry. You've got a good mix of these cheap chaffy troops. Okay range troops. You're a little bit like Middle Era Man. Obviously, Middle Era Man is based on Arthurian legend and kind of medieval European warfare, and Bretonnia is based on the same source material essentially. It's Arthurian legend and things like that. It's these tropes. So you've got military, very, very powerful heavy cavalry, good infantry, and then lots of chaff, which is a nice mix. You also could go with a very heavy bless and use lots and lots of battle pilgrims, use the battle reliquae, things like that. Magic wise, you've got mages that are very good at point buffing, you've got good nature mages, you've got some okay air and okay water. Well, really nature, water, and air, that's where you're strong. You're not really a communion nation exactly. And you can get off very fast expansion because you can do things like Entreat Duke and use the Shepherdess. So, this is turn one, I've got 400 gold. I could choose, for instance, to spend one of my commander points on a Shepherdess, and I could spend one of my commander points on, let's just say we get a Paladin, and then we could spend money on beefing up our expansion force. Our expansion force actually comes with some Knight Errants, so we could throw in some more of those, but we're very resource limited. So perhaps we would go with something that's a lot lower resource. Perhaps we would just toss in some basic peasant shortbows to shoot at the low protection indies. It really depends on what you're expecting to come up against. But I think doing things like spending your commander points instead of always going for mages, you definitely should be building up your mage core and building up your research. I think it is useful to sometimes just go like, okay, this turn I'm going to get a couple of paladins, or this turn I'm going to get a couple of lords, maybe kit them out with some items, but even if you don't, they're actually pretty decent in combat, and you can do some nice tricks with them on attack rear, things like that, with guard commander troops helping them out. Yeah, so if you like that kind of nation, I think Bretonnia is for you. There are no national items that are forgeable and no special national spells currently. There's something that I may add in a later version, but for now, Bretonnia I think is a little bit less weird and strange than some of the other Warhammer nations. It's more similar to the vanilla Dominions experience, but I hope that it's interestingly different. And I've had some good feedback on it so far. I think Burnsaber did a fantastic job on these sprites. The majority of the sprites are by Burnsaber. I did the sprite for the Entreat Duke. I did some cleaning up of some of these sprites. I did some sprites for some of the heroes, but most of it is Burnsaber sprite work. Many of the descriptions are from Burnsaber, and some of the concepts are from Burnsaber as well. So I'd like to give him plenty of credit for having made this mod for Dominions 3, and I think he made one for Dominions 4. But I hope you give Bretonnia a try, and any of the other Warhammer nations. Hopefully I'll have a chance to make some more videos giving national overviews of other Warhammer nations, and I might update these videos at some point if they fall too out of date, because there'll be minor updates to the nations, but if I do some major update reworking a lot of how it works, which is possible at some point, but not super likely, then I will come back and either note in the description that it's changed. Maybe I'll make a new video, maybe I'll edit this video, I'm not sure. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in another video.